by not engaging the real ID or getting your photo taken, and instead be like, here's a passport, it's an international document, not into it, but at least it's not this biometric like weird thing that's going to be tied eventually to people's bank accounts and stuff.
Hey, if you have time to hang out, we're going to watch the first media block. And if you can opine upon it, that's what the show does. That's what we do.
Let's do it. I'm in.
We're going to watch some stuff and we're going to talk about it. It's real complex. It's real complex at the end of the week, wrapping up the week's news because it already happened. It's easy. All right, let's go to it and then we'll be right back.
Today, after nearly 2 decades of implementation and delays, the federal government's new identification requirements for traveling by plane domestically or entering federal buildings technically go into effect. This federally compliant ID card, known as Real ID, can only be attained with specific records and documents laid out by the federal government. It's labeled by a black or gold star in the upper right corner. Even though DHS Secretary Kristi Noem promised that, at least initially, people without a Real ID will only have to face some extra scrutiny at security checkpoints, it's safe to assume that, as the full requirement sets in over the next several weeks and months, some number of people will show up to airports unaware that they no longer have the documents required to board their plane. And because the process of getting through most domestic airports was grueling enough before the deadline, many expect air travel to be especially arduous during the transition. Because of the absoluteness of this new requirement and the harsh punishment for noncompliance, just picture what would happen to you if you tried to get into a federal building or onto a plane without the accepted forms of ID.
And you have to understand, Reagan inherited in 1980 a CIA whose name was Dirt. Okay, the entire 1970s was a drag through the muck of the Central Intelligence Agency. Starting in the late 60s, the Ramparts disclosure, CIA on college campuses using college kids as assets to subvert their political anti-war movement, getting busted assassinating presidents, Frank Church holding up the heart attack gun in Congress. That all happens 1975, 1976. Jimmy Carter comes to power, pledges to crush the dark arts arm of the Central Intelligence Agency. That is the operations wing. There's an operations wing and an intelligence wing. The operations is the one who overthrows, foreign countries and everything. So he does the Saturday Night Massacre. He lays off 30% of the CIA in a single night. The foreign policy establishment hates Jimmy Carter. Carter gets in trouble with the Iran hostage situation, 79. 80, Reagan rises to power, and he's got a compelling need, as he sees it, to restore a full-throated, red-blooded, clandestine operation capacity. But he doesn't have the political capital to do it because the left-wing Democrats hated the CIA at that time.
Well, there's a prolific criminal network operating online right now targeting children, primarily teenagers, but kids as young as 9 have been found to be involved with the group. It's called 764, and you've probably never heard of it. Now, this isn't just a group of online bullies or internet trolls. This is something far darker. It's a decentralized international cult that's part neo-Nazi ideology and satanic symbolism. And what they do is they befriend and gain kids' trust. They then slowly bait them into doing embarrassing, humiliating, and dangerous acts, things like sending nudes, cutting themselves, harming animals, harming siblings, various sex acts, even attempting to commit suicide. And once they get them to do something humiliating, they then use that to extort them into doing worse acts.
Paul, I was curious, do you guys have anything like Real ID in Canada? Is that something that's coming? Is that something that's already there? Do you guys have any equivalent to that you're keeping an eye on, or what's that like up there?
I mean, it's always just around the corner, and currently it's all just like state ID. We have provincial ID, and they're trying to integrate the provincial ID. So right now we've got something called the integrated services card, which your driver's license and your health card combined into one. So it's rather than federalizing it, which is might be too many steps too quickly, they're trying to get it integrated on the provincial level. And then I would imagine by 2040 that they would have some kind of federalized ID. But thankfully, yeah, nothing like Real ID, even though we're going to have some kind of established digital standard to match the state's digital ID or Real ID at some point. So I can see them using that as an excuse to ram it through in Canada as well.
Yeah, that's crazy. I'm a typical American. I don't even have a passport, dude. I'm that just so egregious. I went to Mexico as a kid, but I'm just typical American. I don't, is there even a world outside of America? I don't even know. Probably not, but no, I'm just kidding.
You didn't used to need a passport to get into Mexico.
Yeah, well.
You needed a dime. there was a turnstile, and you would put a dime into it, and it was a dime to get into Mexico, and it was a quarter to get out.
That's cool. But anyway, so I went and applied for my passport a couple weeks ago. So I'm very proud of myself for that. And it was, I'll tell you this little anecdote. It's really quite funny. So I think a lot of this is in response to this Real ID because apparently, allegedly, as it stands now, they're accepting passports as an alternative to Real ID. So I went and applied for it, but I went. So basically, if you go to set up an appointment, and this is just advice for all of you out there, like if you go set an appointment, like it's booked out, like you go to the USPS, US Postal Service, or like a local library, but there's no way to get an appointment like for months out. So they have these spots where you can go. It's a walk-in appointment only at the US Postal Service, and it opened at 9 a.m. And I figured, there'd be a bit of a line, so I got there at about 7 in the morning. And there was already like 40 people in line at 7 in the morning. I was like, what the heck, dude? And a lot of them are not not American people. So I don't know. Anyway, so there's that. But also, so I noticed that. So then the next week I went and I got there at 5 and I was like 20th in line. And it sounds like the people, they get there at like 3 in the morning and just camp out with a camp chair to get a spot in line because they only can process about 30 in each one of these. And so it was each one of these walk-in services. So it's just really crazy. If you do need a passport, like you got to show up way early. And then it's still luck of the draw too, because like the guy, they hand out tickets like 1 through 30. And if you get a ticket, then you get to go in. But like in front of me, I was one of the last ones, even though there was 20 people ahead of me. The first guy in line was waiting in line for 5 people. It was him, his wife, and 3 of his kids. And so there's 5 tickets right there. So just because it looks like you're like the 10th person in line, you still might not get in. So it was really a crazy experience. And then since I was at the back of the line, I kind of became like the ambassador, and like people would show up at like 7, 8 o'clock. One guy showed up at 9 o'clock. I was like, bro, no. So really how it works is you show up on the first week and then you learn the process and then you have to come back the next week. It's really pretty much what everybody has to go through. Everybody who was there had been through that first week of just, being dismayed about the process, the bureaucracy, and the nonsense. And then, but I did get it, and I got it expedited, so hopefully I'll get that here in the next week or 2, I guess. So excited.
And then you can maliciously comply by not engaging the Real ID or getting your photo taken, and instead be like, here's a passport, it's an international document, not into it, but at least it's not this biometric, like, weird thing that's going to be tied eventually to people's bank accounts and stuff.
Yep. Well, Etienne, I'm very curious what your thoughts are on the Real ID.
So I'll tell you a funny passport story. So I was flying into London one year, and I'm in the passport control line, and there's an officer walking up and down, armed UK, immigration control officer, and I pull him over and I say, hey, I just got a quick question for you. I go, what happens, if you show up and you're not anybody's tax slave, you live on an island, you don't have a passport, you just want to come see London. And so you show up in London without somebody's passport. What happens is like, we arrest you. So you have to be somebody's tax slave to be able to get into the UK.
Yeah.
That kind of makes sense since they're one of the originators of the tax slave system, like officiating it and legalizing it and creating it. And we talk about so much how Britain wants to reconquer America to use it. And it's like, that would be the primary, other than for its military strength, the tax space would be the main reason, right? Like, who's the national debt owed to this giant cartel of international banks, and at the head of it's pretty much City of London, give or take a few other entities, right? So they are always going to be trying to push for centralization. And Mark Carney, who just became the head of Canada, the new prime minister, he was both the head of the Bank of England and the Bank of Canada at 2 different points. And he is the one who authored the idea to freeze people's bank accounts during the Canadian trucker protests as a punishment for not obeying the vaccine mandates. So that kind of gives you some insight into the mindset behind some of these people. And Mark Carney considers himself like a British European who's just like, I guess I'll move back to Canada to lead the country and take over. And then they just kind of walked him right in.
Well, he was also the head of Canadian BlackRock.
That's right. Yeah. What's the name of that company? Brookfield Asset Management. Yeah. And who's a big investor in X, which they're talking about, oh, Carney might ban X in Canada. And it's like, oh, does he want to damage his own investment? Like, I don't understand the logic behind that.
Well, since we're talking about X, one of the things that I've pointed out is one of the most fascinating things I learned, or the most fascinating thing I learned in 2006. I was at a technology conference in Boston, and to kind of mix it up, they had a cultural anthropologist, and he told a story of some research that Duke University did, where they took these monkeys and they put these monkeys in front of television screens, and the monkeys were drinking cherry juicy juice out of a little hamster thing. And as long as they kept drinking the juicy juice, different images would keep, going by the monkey's face. And as long as they're drinking the juicy juice, the images keep going. But at any time, they can freeze and look at particular pictures by not drinking the juicy juice. And so in essence, they were paying to see certain photographs, because that's, what delay of gratification is like paying, like a way of paying for something. And so what two photographs do you think the monkeys were willing to pay to see? And I'll go ahead and preface that by saying that they were male monkeys.
Female monkeys?
Yes. Number one answer, rear female monkey hindquarter. And the anthropologist that's like telling this story, he's got a slide deck going, he clicks it, and there's this monkey leaning over suggestively, looking back, and it was like the crowd went wild, and everybody got that. But then the most fascinating thing was that was the other one, and everybody's like bananas fighting, like they're throwing out all these things. Not a single person in the audience of like 300 people got it, and he's like, the monkeys were willing to pay to see pictures of higher status monkeys. And so monkeys live in a troop of monkeys. There might be 20 monkeys in the troop, and there's a defined pecking order by beatdown. And if you're monkey number 2, you'll pay to see monkey number 1, but you're not going to pay to see monkey, 3 through 20. If you're monkey number 4, you'll pay to see 1, 2, and 3, but you're not going to pay to see monkey, 5 through whatever. And so it was like a bullet through the brain. It was like, okay, monkeys and humans, I guess, are biologically predisposed to look at celebrity, at higher status monkeys. And so if you take a look at X, they've got one of the highest status monkeys in the world. They put him on top of a social media platform that is able to steer people's attention. And it's just brilliant. It's just, but some of that biology behind X is that monkeys and humans are biologically predisposed to look at pictures of higher status monkeys.
So then Instagram's kind of like a monkey training box.
All of it is. It's the digital Skinner box in your hand, and if you can control the screens, and you can, like in the COVID, you can force everybody inside, not allow them to socialize. And then you can control the screens that they're using and use little tricks and behavioral psychology and things like that. You can control the information that they receive, and you can control people's world outlook because you control the screens and you understand how to make people watch.
Well, speaking to that, the idea you brought up in the last segment with the Pentagon essentially funding Hollywood movies, and I was looking that up during the break, and just to get a bit more information. And it's funny you mentioned Michael Bay, because he has military presence in so many of his films, and it turns out the arrangement that he has is the Pentagon will give him access to jet flyovers, tanks, like whatever military hardware he wants, but they want script control to make sure that the US military is never portrayed in a negative light, and to set up these moments, like you said, these high emotional impact moments. And interestingly, one film that was not given any of this Pentagon stuff after they read the script and weren't able to get script approval was the 1990s film called Three Kings with George Clooney and Ice Cube. And that's about 3 U.S. Army soldiers who go to Iraq and basically start trying to steal. And so it doesn't make the U.S. Army, it's almost a satirical movie. It doesn't make them look good in any way, shape, or form. And so the Pentagon's like, yeah, we're actually going to tell all our other subcontractors not to give you access to any military equipment for your film. So it'll make it even harder to set up these scenarios. And so if you watch Three Kings, I think it's from 1999, all the military hardware in the entire film is stuff from like the 60s and 70s that they had to repaint to make it look like it was from the 90s because the Pentagon completely tried to cut them off.
And that's weird because most directors and producers, they go along with it, and then when they get that script control, they're excising, anything that makes the government look bad. To your point, to a degree where they're rewriting history. So they're sanitizing. There is no. You're not going to find the My Lai massacre in a movie. In a movie about Vietnam. It's not going to be referred to. It's not. So you're kind of giving the population a completely inaccurate understanding of what the military's like, what it's like to be in the military, who's in the military. It has absolutely nothing to do with reality. I guess we all knew that, but it really reinforces it to the point of they're rewriting history. And that the majority of what people think happened in the Vietnam War, the Korean War, or the Gulf Wars, or whatever, has nothing to do with what actually happened because it's all been sanitized by Hollywood.
And they're able to use that control essentially to create these as recruitment tools, right? It's both propaganda, for nationalism, but primarily it's like, we want you to think the military is cool so that you'll join up and go fight in these foreign bankster wars of aggression. And, props to the U.S. military and people who join for the right reasons. But yeah.
So that's definitely part of it. But what I'm breaking down in the new book, To See the Cage is to Leave It, is that they're selling the idea of being an American and that you are an American. Using these unethically manipulative techniques. I'm just a free and independent human being that, like I said, got born on one of the nicer, tax plantations. But I don't self-identify as an American the same way that if you're born in Compton, you don't have to be a Crip. If you're born in, South Los Angeles, you don't have to be a Blood. Like, they're just because you're born somewhere. What they're doing is they're trying to get people to internalize themselves as an American, which is kind of an artificial tribe. When I say artificial, I'm from Texas, and if you live in Texas, you don't have a lot, in common with people that are in Hawaii. If you live in Maine, you don't have a lot in common with people that are in South Florida. If you live in Mississippi, you don't really have a lot in common with people that live in Utah. And so it's a giant, kind of mental construct. And if they can get you to internalize by tricking you, okay, by doing these little things like not just product placing the American flag at moments of high positive emotion in the movies and the theaters, but some of the other techniques that we break down in the book is they're putting the flag on the backboard of the NBA so that you subconsciously associate the exhilaration of the goal with the flag. They're paying to do the kind of flag worship ceremonies at the football games and the hockey games and the basketball games. They're actually paying the teams. A couple of years ago, it was $57 million a year to do all of these, these giant flags at halftime and the jet flyovers and kind of everything that they do. And so that's another. It's an advertising technique called anchoring, where everybody loves to be at the football game. Everybody's having a good, time. And so while they're having that, that like you're outside, you're in the sun, you've got a couple of beers in you. And so they're taking the exhilaration of being at the game and they're anchoring it to the flag the same way that they're, building the movie up to a moment of high positive emotion and showing you the flag. A lot of times they do it like kind of like secretly. And so this year at the Super Bowl, they didn't do an overt flag ceremony. What they did is they had Kendrick Lamar's backup dancers in red, white, and blue, and then they formed an American flag for a second, and then Mustard, one of the other performers, he's got, American flags on his, prominently, literally 2 American flags on the front of his jacket. And so they're doing these kind of unethically manipulative techniques to give everybody like this warm and fuzzy when you think about being an American or when you think about the United States, so that they can tax farm you. And so that's really what we're trying to expose in the book, is that the government's running game, these unethically manipulative techniques.
Yeah, man. Yeah, and you were saying earlier about, well, I was gonna say just the reason why this show is so important is because Richard shows like the hidden history that isn't normally available to the people. Like this is stuff like I've learned so much just being a part of this project, and everybody in the audience has as well. That's the stuff that they don't make movies about. This is the stuff that contradicts what the movies are about. And I'd say most people's perception or understanding or what they think history is literally from movies.
Yes.
All of like World War II history is all from movies, dude. But what actually happened is like so far removed from like what was actually depicted in these movies. Like, so Hollywood is the history book of our times, and that's why it's such an effective weapon to steer their narrative. And that's why it's so important for this show and shows like it to present the truth with primary source evidence that they'll just never make movies about some of this stuff, which is fascinating because the stories that you learn about here are so much more interesting than the ones that they make movies about. Like if it was about telling a good story with rich, amazing characters, they would make stories aligned with just all the stuff that we talk about week in and week out. It's way more fascinating than any of these stupid Hollywood movies. So that's really interesting.
Etienne, would you say that this is all done kind of to create statism in the minds of people so that it acts as like an invisible cage where
Without
you
a
can't see
doubt.
the bars? It's like a form of the Matrix almost.
Right. The book is called "To See the Cage Is to Leave It," and it really is. It's the number one weapon used against the population is control of perception. Can we make the population self-identify as an American or a Canadian or an Australian, so that they can be tax farmed, and that so they will obey this hierarchical kind of command and control structure that we've instituted, that is very, very easy to rig. And so the election system in the United States, here in the United States, Paul, I'm sure you probably know that we vote on unauditable black box voting machines and mail-in ballots, both of which are notorious for the ability to rig that. You can, rig the black box voting machines at the central tabulator. That's been proven. There's been, like computer programmers that have testified that they've hacked and been paid to, write backdoors into, election, software. And then, with the mail-in ballots, the documentary 2,000 Mules tracked thousands and thousands and thousands of ballot mules that were dropping off tens of thousands, that they just tracked, to hundreds of thousands of ballots, where, certain ballot mules were just going in like circles to different drop boxes, filling up the drop boxes with these mail-in ballots. And so it's a very easy system to hijack. But to get people to go along with it, you've got to convince them that it's legitimate, that it's desirable, that it's necessary to have a government. And so they're doing things, like everything from, making the government the hero, in the movies, to making the people, that oppose the government, look like, like anarchists, make anarchists look like chaos and dystopia. And, people that are going to, throw Molotov cocktails through, coffee shop windows. And so that control of perception, making the government the hero at the same time that you're, simultaneously either demonizing the opposition, or you're shadow banning them, you're demonetizing them, you're de-indexing them, you're algorithmically censoring people away from them, even if that people have subscribed and say, hey, I want to get this organization's, information. If they're censoring it at the spam filter level, if they're algorithmically, suppressing it, in, Twitter feeds so that it's not being shown, even if it is quote unquote retweeted, that ability to control perception and to control the information that people receive, that is the most powerful weapon on the planet.
Yeah, man. I think, actually that's such a good point too about the perception of anarchism versus like true, like what we talk about when it comes to anarchism. I just spent a week at an anarchist festival in Kansas, the Midwest Preparedness Project. I want to give it a plug for anybody that's out there next year. Got to go check it out. So cool. I got invited out there to play some music, but it was literally just like an anarchist hangout, dude. We did a barter town, right? No, everyone brought, I didn't know. People showed up with trailers full of stuff to barter. Apparently this is a thing, right? But the only rule is no fiat currency allowed. And and it was all like potluck style with just amazing food, right? Joel Salatin was there. I got to interview him. It was so cool. But anyway, this is what happens when a group of anarchists come together and self-organize and put their heads together and form just a small little microcosm of what could be for a week, and then we all go our separate ways. But it's just so inspiring to be involved in something like that. Like that is the essence of anarchy. But of course, the media can't allow there to be like a whimsical, positive view of anarchy because that directly threatens their institution, right? Yeah.
Oh yeah. I just got back from Prospera, on the island of Roritan off the coast of Honduras, and it's a free private city where they've negotiated sovereignty from the government of Honduras. And when they first, did this deal when they negotiated sovereignty, it was a pro-government, it was a pro-business government that passed this law called a Zete law in Honduras. And in the interim, socialists and communists came in, and now they're trying to get rid of Prospera because they don't want there to be an example of a laboratory of liberty. They don't want, so Prospera has, kind of one of the lowest tax rates on the planet. It's got the lowest regulatory burden of kind of any place you can go and live. It's a 5% tax rate, 1% on governments, and a 2.5% retail tax. And so the government of Honduras has an up to 25% tax rate with like a 10% value added tax. And I forget what the capital gains tax is. And so there's been over 150 million invested in Prospera. If they could get the government off the back, I've heard estimates of almost as much as $1 billion has been kind of like sitting on the sidelines because the socialist government is antagonizing them. But like that is, people don't want like socialist governments and communist governments don't want there to be a example of a low tax, low regulation alternative thriving right next to them. And so they'll do anything that they can do to kind of get rid of that. And so it's quite a knife fight that's going on down there, but it may turn for the better because there's going to be elections and it looks like they're going to vote the commies out, come November.
That's crazy, man. I never heard of this. I'm looking at it right now. I'm going to definitely look into this more. Like, reminds me of kind of like what Derek Bros and them did with like Morelia a little bit. And like with the Free State Project, like there's like efforts of similar things. Like, what do you think though? Because like in a communist country like that alarms me, trying to make a sovereign place in a communist country. Well, honestly, what are your thoughts on this? Like, do you think it would be easier to do something like that with the overarching communist regime in place, or would it be easier, more practical to do it with a place like America that claims to have like a freedom at its core? Like, what are your thoughts on that?
So Prosper. So I'm tracking all of these. I'm working on a new book called Voluntarism: How the Only Ism Fair for Everybody Leads to Harmony, Prosperity, and Good Karma for All. And so I just released one of the chapters, which was on Prospera at artofliberty.substack.com. And on that, I've got a huge article where I break down everything that you need to know about Prospera. And so the two that I find most exciting are Prospera in Honduras, because that proves that you can have, you can have governance as a service. They're providing governance as a service to where they're kind of like the HOA. You opt in, they've got armed protective services, but they're not, trolling people. They're not using the armed protectors to raise revenue on the population. They're not prosecuting victimless crimes. The only thing that the Armed Protective Services of Prosperity do is, like keep you from getting robbed or murdered or, everything like that. I mean, it's kind of the night watchman. You have the right to defend your life, liberty, and property. So you can actually give that to the night watchman or to the security guard to exercise on your behalf. You don't have the ability yourself to break up your neighbor's poker game. So how did the government get that ability? So they're not doing anything like that. They're like an HOA, but they've got the most cost-effective governance of almost, of any place on the planet. And so what's happening is people are now voting with their feet, and they're moving to places where they have lower taxes and better private property protections. And so that dynamic is going on, and I like Prospera and I like the Free State Project in New Hampshire, and I'm kind of trying to help both of those. But in the Free State Project, the example that I like to use is, a couple of years ago, the tax man came to Porcupine Freedom Festival to try and collect the New Hampshire's meals tax on, meals sold at the festival. And the tax man got, there are two of them, and they got surrounded, they got made fun of, they got mocked, they got run off, and they've never been back to Porcupine Freedom Festival to try and collect the meals tax ever since. And so that's the dynamic that's getting close in New Hampshire, is that there's so many liberty lovers that when the, kind of shave-headed cult member enforcers show up, they're surrounded, they're mocked. There's enough civil disobedience where people aren't going to be robbed by government anymore, and that there's enough people within the population that understand that government is illegitimate. You can't have a legitimate government. There's no way of delegating rights you don't have yourself to a representative to represent you doing something you don't have the ability to do yourself. And so, if we can get that 100th monkey in a place like New Hampshire. And they're already rolling it back. I think they just cut $200 million out of the budget. So they're cutting taxes, they're repealing regulations, they're like they're winning in New Hampshire. And so that's what we need. We need laboratories of liberty where we can prove that, you don't necessarily have to have government. You can have a private company providing governance as a service more cost effectively with better private property protections and less taxes, and then that becomes the standard, and then people vote with can vote with their feet, and they can go to places where they're reducing their tax burden, and they can do business more easily, and those places are going to thrive. And I love it. I think it's the kind of one of the most exciting things in liberty is that we've now got a couple of laboratories of liberty where the free market is starting to shine.
That's awesome. Are you going to Pork Fest this year?
Yeah, I'll probably be there. I'm looking forward to it. I missed it last year, so I love Pork Fest.
Okay, yeah, I'm pretty much 90% committed to going, but we'll see.
You will love it.
I know. That's my jam.
Paul, are you coming down?
I went in 2018. I'm hoping to make it out there this year with my wife. We've got a lot of stuff going on, so we're juggling all these balls to see what we can do. But
Same.
I got a great vibe from it last time, and I like to see that people who are self-reliant and value autonomy are able to form up these different coalitions that don't want parasitic middlemen and bureaucrats essentially to start elbowing their way into their life, and they're able to just handle their own stuff. And if they can't handle something themselves, then they find someone who can help them handle it, and they strike up a private deal between them. And you don't need these gangsters coming in and demanding their protection money and their cut of whatever you're doing. And like you said, the more we can show examples, models, and templates of exactly how to do this, the more people can start replicating it and emulating it. And unfortunately for more socialist and communist leaning people, if they feel threatened by that, then come up with a better idea.
Socialism ideas so good. What is it?
You have to implement them by force.
Yeah. Well, there's something even funnier, but I'm having a brain lock on it.
Well, same with our system. It's all by force or the threat of force. Right? Yeah. Yeah. Well, shoot. Dang. Well, Howard, Etienne, where do we get your book? Look, I got this one right here. I got this one right here. I got article.
So the new book, it's
Biggest
funny
scam,
because
but where do we get the book?
I literally we just turned it on right before the show. The website is called seethecage.com. And on seethecage.com, we've got paperback copies that are in stock. I'm still waiting to have the hard copies delivered, and then we're going to kind of launch it. But we're just at the cusp. Like I said, this is only the second show that I've actually mentioned the book on, and so very, very excited about it. And like I said, once you read it, you can't unsee it. Like, it's so visual. Like, you're like, oh my God, it's a cult. It really is. And and I guess that's the takeaway, is that the belief in being an American is an indoctrinated, they're indoctrinating it as a religion. And then it makes sense out of a lot of the things that you see where people are wearing Americana, and that they're religiously attached to the idea of being American. They dress up in as American flags and parades. They hold the flag with white gloves. That you, like, when you can't just bury the flag, but like, it's a whole bunch of different techniques that a lot of people have been a part of, but they've never really thought about it. And I'll just, kind of run down a couple more of them. But here in the United States, Paul, I'm sure, I don't know if you guys do this in Canada, but in middle school, they'll take the kids kind of on a field trip to Washington, D.C., and they'll take them into the Cathedral of the Capitol that looks like the Vatican for a reason. They'll take them into the temples. And if you've ever been to Washington, D.C., if you've ever been to the Lincoln Memorial, or you've been to the Thomas Jefferson Memorial, they are Greek temples. The parallels between that and a Greek temple are stunning, and it's very hushed, and it's very reverent, and it is a kind of like religious experience to be in the temple. And in the case of Lincoln, both of his hands rest on fasces. And so the root word of fascism is a fascie, and a fascie is an axe surrounded by sticks held together with a piece of leather. And the idea is that that one stick is easily broken, but a bundle of sticks together, it's much harder to break. But Lincoln's in his temple, his hands rest on two fasces, which is the root word of fascism. And so I'm kind of like breaking all of this down, in the book. But some of the other, techniques are, run the course from just the government school system, like, having a mandatory government school where they're forcing the kids to go to this school, and they're teaching them before they're really old enough to evaluate the logic and the morality of the idea. Should we have a government? Is government legitimate? Is it moral? Is it logical? Does it make any sense? How did the government get rights that you don't have? And part of the reason why people have, fallen for it or have never really thought about it is they get them when they're young, and they put them into these schools running the Prussian model of education, that was designed, by the architects described it, to create fealty to a German feudal system, essentially, and to get people to fight for the state. And so that system continues today, and most people never ever think about it. In the Cub Scouts and the Boy Scouts and then the JROTC and the Explorers, that's the same system that Hitler used. And I've got some quotes in the book, and I'm just going to read this one from kind of Adolf Hitler, where he describes the JROTC, the ROTC, and AmeriCorps, and just see if this rings true. But he said, these boys and girls enter our organizations at 10 years of age, and often for the first time get a little fresh air. And after 4 years of the young folks, the Cub Scouts, they go on to the Hitler Youth, Boy Scouts, where we have them for another 4 years. And even if they are not completely National Socialists, statists, they go on to the labor service, AmeriCorps, and are smoothed out there for another 6, 7 months, and whatever class consciousness or social status might be left, the Wehrmacht, the German armed forces, the military, will take care of that. And so it really was like they were looking at it as a system.
Uh-oh. Looks like he, oops.
It's like we lost.
Oops. Yep. Okay.
It
That said, I was muted. Can you guys hear me? That was weird.
Yep.
Yeah, that was weird. That was a weird one.
Oh, we'll see
Shoot.
if he comes
And
back.
if you're out there, bounce back in, dude. Maybe they drone striked him, dude.
Oh my
That's
God.
too much. Boom.
His book is just so impactful and profound that they're just like, we can't let word of this book go out into the public. So
Those guys who invented Zoom heard him talking smack.
Yep, exactly. Well, he just texted me laptop died. Okay. Okay, cool. Glad you didn't get drone striked. Okay, drone.
Twice a year, I teach a course called Autonomy. It's a 12-week course. It teaches leadership, entrepreneur skills, executive skills, all these types of things that I saw were taken out of our education system in order to make the schooling or indoctrination system that we've all probably went through. And it has served us well enough to be interchangeable cogs in the machine of the globalists. But if we want a homestead, if we want write our own ticket, work from home job, work from anywhere type of situation, they're not exactly handing those out at the end of college. They give you a piece of paper and they're like, good luck. So reality is dropping us off here, but the demands of reality are up here. So I created Autonomy to help people close that gap for themselves so they can level up their skills to the demands of the situations that life is putting in front of us presently. Life's demands of intellect and understanding precision and complexity are ever increasing. The schooling didn't prepare us for it. The media is not going to do anything but reinforce what schooling prepared us for. And so we're going to have to take a leadership position and take steps off the beaten path to kind of blaze our own trail in life. What makes the Grand Theft World podcast unique, invigorating, exciting, and informative? Most other podcasts out there are either doing straight up interviews or they're just covering the daily news. They're covering current events from the day they happened. And that is effective. It's useful. It's a great starting point. And then sometimes these current events change during the week past the first story. So we like to give it a little time. You have to wait till some of the dust settles on these stories in order to give them accurate coverage. And the other thing that's really missing in the media landscape is covering the articles that are coming out every day. That's great. That's necessary. But who's bringing in contextual history so that you can understand what has been going on for decades and decades to lead up to the machinations and actions that we see unfolding today? So what we do here on the podcast is we cover current events. Many of these things are censored, but we wait about a week. As a forensic historian, I focused mainly through my career on the history of globalism and collectivism and things that they call maybe the New World Order. There's a lot of facts to these sort of circumstances, groups, events, activities, working groups that they've had over time. So for Grand Theft World listeners, we not only break down the current events, most of which that are censored during the week, we provide you with contextual history, we give you the source notes, the references, we do deep dives, and this really empowers you with an understanding of context and history so that you can make more informed decisions in your life. There's also a community, a membership where you guys can actually ask questions and we can get into the show and we can share evidence. And there's a town hall weekly for Grand Theft World for those who listen to it and are interested in covering the stories that we don't get to during a 6-hour show. Listening to it an hour a day, you could easily consume the week's news, but you're going to have substance and meaning and context and understanding. And with that, you can make higher quality decisions in your life. So if you're interested in more quality in your life, go to grandtheftworld.com, click podcast at the top, and we'll see you there. Thank you.
These allegations are false.
This isn't Grand Theft Auto, folks. This isn't a video game.
What are the most surprising things that you discovered once you started pulling on that thread? Who he was connected to, what institutions he was influential over, what events he participated in?
Come on, man. What are we talking about? Come on, man. No.
You don't have to think about it, dude.
I got this quote because you said you didn't know much about Klaus Schwab. I made it my job to, as soon as this happened, I'm like, okay, this guy's their front man. Let me learn about the official history of the World Economic Forum. I got their 40-year history. I got every book that Klaus Schwab has written or ghostwritten. I went through those books. This is one of the most interesting passages.
Come on, man.